This is the story of the dynasty you've never heard of and the apocalypse that erased it from memory. Meet Lystrosaurus, about the size of a pig, a face only a paleontologist could love. And for a few million years after the worst extinction event in Earth's history, the Permian extinction, it was everywhere. Fossils of this creature had been found on every continent: Antarctica, India, South Africa, China. It didn't just survive the end of the world, it owned the aftermath. But Lystrosaurus wasn't alone. It belonged to a group called the Dicynodonts, the two dog teeth, and before the dinosaurs ever set foot on the stage, Dicynodonts were the herbivores of Earth, the grazers, the ecosystem engineers. Think of them as the bison of the Triassic, except they weren't mammals, not quite. They were synapsids, our distant cousins, part of the lineage that would eventually lead to you, me, and every warm-blooded creature alive today. And some of them, they got big. To understand why Dicynodonts dominated, you have to understand their world. This is Pangaea, one massive supercontinent. No Atlantic Ocean, no Amazon rainforest, just endless interior deserts, seasonal monsoons, and a climate that swung between brutal droughts and catastrophic floods. It was a world built for survivors, and Dicynodonts, they were perfectly adapted. Their beaks, similar to a turtle's, let them shear through tough, fibrous plants that most animals couldn't digest. Their tusks weren't weapons, they were tools, digging roots, stripping bark, surviving when food was scarce. And here's the kicker: they weren't competing with dinosaurs yet. Dinosaurs were still small, still figuring things out, still hiding in the margins. The real competition? Other synapsids, giant amphibians, early archosaurs, the crocodile cousins of the dinosaurs. But Dicynodonts had something none of them did. Numbers, herds, cooperation, the ability to strip a landscape bare and move on before the next drought hit. They were the buffalo of the Triassic, keystone species that shaped entire ecosystems. And in a world where food was unpredictable, that strategy made them kings. But the world was changing, slowly, almost invisibly at first, because while the Dicynodonts grazed, something else was evolving in the shadows. Dinosaurs. Now I know what you're thinking. Dinosaurs? I thought they took over after the extinction. Not quite. Dinosaurs appeared in the Middle Triassic around 230 million years ago. But for tens of millions of years, they were nobody. They were the bit players, the extras, the creatures paleontologists barely paid attention to because they were so unremarkable. They were small, they were rare, they ate insects, lizards, maybe scavenged when they could. But they had one advantage: posture. Dinosaurs stood upright. Their legs were directly beneath their bodies, like modern birds and mammals, which made them faster, more efficient, more agile. Dicynodonts, they still moved like their reptilian ancestors, sprawling, lumbering, powerful, but slow. And in the late Triassic, as the climate destabilized again, that difference started to matter. And then the world ended. Again. This is the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, one of the big 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history, and it was caused by something we're seeing echoes of today: volcanic supereruptions. The Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, CAMP, was a volcanic event so massive it made modern eruptions look like fireworks. Lava covered an area the size of South America. Gases choked the atmosphere, temperatures spiked, oceans acidified. And the Dicynodons? They couldn't adapt fast enough. Their strategy, grazing in herds, eating low-quality plants, surviving droughts, didn't work when the entire food chain collapsed. When the plants died, they starved. When the temperatures spiked, they overheated. When the air turned to ash, their lungs couldn't filter it. And in the span of a few 100,000 years, a blink in geological time, the Dicynodons vanished. But the dinosaurs, they survived. Because they were small, because they were adaptable, because they could eat almost anything and live almost anywhere. And with the Dicynodonts gone, there was suddenly so much space. Space to evolve, space to grow, space to become the giants we know. The Jurassic wasn't the age of dinosaurs because they were destined to rule. It was because they were lucky enough to survive. So what happened to the Dicynodonts? A few lineages survived into the early Jurassic, small ones, clinging to the margins, but they never reclaimed their throne. And eventually, they faded into the fossil record. But here's the thing. We remember them. Not in our history books, not in museum exhibits, but in our bodies. When you chew food, you're using a jaw structure that evolved in their ancestors. When you hear sound, you're using bones that once were part of their reptilian jaw. When you regulate your body temperature, you're benefiting from adaptations that started with them. The Dicynodonts didn't win, but they didn't lose either. They became us. Which raises one final question. What if the volcanoes never erupted? What if the Dicynodonts had survived? Would they have kept evolving? Would they have developed intelligence? Would they be the ones standing upright, shaping the world, telling stories about extinct dinosaurs? We'll never know. But here's what haunts me. Earth doesn't care about destiny. It doesn't pick winners. It just keeps changing. The Dicynodonts ruled for 50 million years, longer than humans have existed, longer than most dinosaur species lasted. They didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because the planet changed faster than they could. And if you think that's ancient history, look around. We're living on a planet that's changing again, faster than it has in millions of years. The Dicynodonts couldn't adapt in time. The dinosaurs got lucky. What about us? But their world didn't stay empty for long. Because after the Dicynodonts fell, and while the dinosaurs spread across the land, something else was evolving in the rivers. A predator. One so specialized, so perfectly adapted to its environment, that it could kill even a tyrant king. A monster crocodile that turned rivers into hunting grounds and made even the largest dinosaurs think twice before drinking. That's next time.